Oh, yeah, we got to overturn.
You're listening to the E-Men, inside the NYPD's Emergency Service Unit. And good evening. Welcome to a Friday edition of the Mike the New Haven podcast. ESU show tonight, and a little bit of transit rescue involved as well, since that's where tonight's guest spent a good chunk of his career on the rescue side of things. Like I said before, and I mentioned this when I had Anita Rosato on a little while ago, if they didn't hit us with the copyright claim, I would have rolled out the Transit Cops intro from when they filmed with them back in '94. If you go back and you watch the interviews I did with Franco Berarducci, Joe Ocasio, and Ken Schnetzler, I did use that intro pre-monetization era of this program. And it's really through reading on ESU and that episode of Cops, as I mentioned before, where I found out about a lot of these guys. And welcome back to this episode of the Mike the New Haven podcast. If you haven't checked out the previous one, volume 57 of the best, the bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite. And that was with former FDNY Chief of Operations, Rich Bladis, who retired after 42 years on the job and saw a lot of different things go on with the FDNY that he got to be a part of. So really good conversation with him. Enjoyed it a whole heck of a lot. And I know I'll enjoy tonight. A lot of guys and gals were telling me that they were looking forward to this show. I even got a call from Maddie Lawrence right before the show went on the air, mentioning how much she was looking forward to it. So tonight's guest is certainly highly regarded. Hello to everybody tuning in via YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And to those of you in the chat, John Costello and Billy Ryan. And as always, before we get into the sponsors, the super chat's there. If you want to contribute there, if you have a question for tonight's guest, fire away. Sponsors really quick. First things first. Actually, since I just mentioned them, we could roll Billy Ryan first and his PI firm. The Mike the New Haven podcast is proudly sponsored and supported by the Ryan Investigative Group. If you need an elite PI, look no further than the elite Ryan Investigative Group, which is run by retired NYPD detective Bill Ryan, a 20-year veteran of the department who served the majority of his career in the Detective Bureau, most notably in the Arson and Explosion Squad. So if you need a PI to handle anything from fraud, legal services, and anything else that you might require, contact Bill at 347-417-1610. Again, 347-417-1610. Reach him at his website or the email that you see here. Again, if you need a PI, look no further than Bill Ryan and the Ryan Investigative Group, a proud supporter and sponsor of the Mike the New Haven podcast. Proud supporter and sponsor of the Mike the New Haven podcast, indeed. And also, as I've said before, you got to advocate for yourself. I am in the consulting world, and that is with MC Media Editing Services. Need advice on how to start your podcast? Frustrated with the editing process? Can't find a voiceover guy? Hi, I'm Mike Colón, and I'm here to help. I'm the owner and founder of MC Media Editing Services, your premier consulting company for all things media, where I can offer you consulting advice on how to get started, and once you get started, editing, as well as voiceover work, all for a very reasonable price. If you want to reach me, you can contact me at 917-781-6189 or the email that you see listed here. I'm always available, and I'm always willing to help. Again, 917-781-6189. Why go to some giant consulting firm that's going to charge you an arm and a leg when you can just come to me? If you want to be stress-free, the way to go is to call MC. MC Media Editing Services, your premier consulting company. And hi to John Latanzio in the chat there, another great guy. Hello, everyone, he says. Got two things to do tonight. Watch Darrell and the rocket launch down in Florida at 9:20 p.m. So busy Friday night for John, former veteran of 5-truck, 3-truck, and housing rescue, respectively. All right, my next guest responded to emergencies of all sorts, both underground and above ground. As I said, he was a member of not one but two rescue squads during his career: New York City Transit Police Emergency Medical Rescue Unit, and then when they merged with the NYPD in 1995, NYPD Emergency Service Unit. And he had a hand in instructing the next generation of E-cops because he was down at Floyd Bennett Field for a while, instructing them along with a few other cops that we'll mention tonight. And that for this volume 45, I mistakenly put it as 46, but it's 45 of the E-Men inside the NYPD's Emergency Service Unit is Mr. Darrell Summers. Darrell, welcome. How are you?
Thank you. Good. Doing great. Thank you for this platform, this opportunity. Thank you.
No, and thank you for making the time. I appreciate it. Been meaning to get you for a while because there's a documentary, like a mini documentary, also on YouTube called City Underground, where it was right before you guys merged with the NYPD. And it's about 15 minutes or so on the functions of the transit police. And there's a section where they talk about EMRU. Miguel Ramos is in it, and I met him at 2-Truck last year, and you're in it too. So I texted Franco a while ago. I'm like, hey, do you know this guy? He's like, yeah, it's Darrell. It's my old partner. So that's how I found out about you. So shout out to Franco who helped me get in touch with you a while ago. So before we get into your career and your interest in civil service and all of that, tell me where you grew up.
Grew up in Brooklyn, born, raised in Brooklyn. As a child, would go back and forth between, New York City, South Carolina, on the farm with my grandparents. So it was a good time, but mainly East New York, Crown Heights is where I grew up at.
Hmm.
So some fun times. I had an older brother. My oldest brother recently passed in November of last
I'm
year,
sorry.
but have two younger brothers, Tishan and Steve. So it was a good experience growing up as a child.
No, you had both backgrounds. Kind of funny because you had a similar upbringing to Tony Johnson. It was the same thing with Tony. He spent some time in the city, but he also spent some time down with his grandparents in one of the Carolinas. So very
Mhm.
similar background there. So some guys get exposed to it early on. And I think Rick Martinez, I remember him telling me a story where he saw ESU respond to an injured kid who I think had broken his leg in a bicycle accident. And that kind of kickstarted his desire. Other people, it's their parents or relatives telling them, hey, take the test for obvious reasons, good benefits, city job, pension, all that jazz. Where would you say, and what point of your life was it where you decided, you know what, even if you didn't know you wanted to be a cop right away, I want to get into civil service and I want to help people?
It's actually twofold. I'm going to credit the TV from watching the emergency show on,
Yep.
Rampart 51, Squad 51. Um, that excited me. But then my father, he worked for New York City Transit Authority. He was a civil servant. And then my cousin, Vaughn Banks Sr., who also played a father role in my life. He too, those were the examples before me. And the thing that you took advantage of and you paid attention to in my early childhood is when the elders, so to speak, the men in the family sat you down and had that man-to-man talk with you. And one of those conversations was that to give yourself the opportunity, um, sign up. We would buy the chief newspaper and we would monitor that for different exams that would come. And they said, you can take the test, you can always say no, but give yourself that opportunity. So, we took several civil service tests. Um, but when it came to NYPD, um, I actually went to some of the classes that they offered in preparation for the test and scored well on the test. And you know, I I waited for my opportunity to be called. So, but as far as putting that bug in me, again, my father, I have to give him credit, and cousin Vaughn, who I consider a father, I definitely have to give him credit. He was a transit police officer, um, so that's the spark.
Hmm. And thank you for mentioning that because the common tie, no matter if I'm interviewing PD or FD guest, is family, like you said. And I appreciate you mentioning specifically those man to man talks because, yeah, it could be anybody, mom or dad or uncle, anybody that cares about you, sits you down. And that's always the thing I hear. You can say no to it, but at least take the test and give yourself the opportunity. And you hit the nail on the head perfectly there. And so many guys ended up saying yes to it. And looking back all these years later, they're so glad they did. Now, a lot of guys don't, and I've heard this too with the police side of things in New York City for guys who came on back then. They didn't know there were three different police departments until they were in the academy. And then they found out there was a housing police. And then they found out there was a transit police. Not your case, as you said, you had a relative who was on the job in transit. So coming on, did you have a preference of where you wanted to go, or did you not care? Were you just happy to be a New York City police officer?
Well, first of all, I was happy to be a New York City police officer. I'm going to say, my cousin Vaughn, he was encouraging to come transit route. But it was actually funny when I got my letter, um, for the police department to show up. When I came down there, I did go to NYPD because that's where the letter indicated. And they were going through the list and they said, your name is not listed. And I'm like, okay. I said, this is what the letter says. So they said, well, go to housing. And I went to housing, and they said, your name is not listed there. So they said, well, go to transit. So when I got to transit, I was, I'm going to say somewhat sarcastic. I said, okay, are you going to tell me my name is not here either? And the guy was like, what, you don't want the job? I said, no, I want the job. But I just came from two other, agencies who said, no, my name is not listed. But there my name was, and that began my, career with New York City Transit Police.
It was definitely not an easy job back then. Mid 80s, crime's out of control, especially on the subways. Things are happening hot and heavy. TPF, I think, was still around back then in transit. I think the NYPD had done away with it, if I'm not mistaken, but transit still had it. And I remember John Bushing telling me, and Franco telling me this as well, that in the early days, you would ride point to point on different
Yes.
subway cars. So you really got to learn the city if you didn't know it already. You ended up going to District 30 a little bit later on, but just focusing on TPF first, what station did they have you out of the academy?
Well, right out of the academy, what happened, all transit officers went to Gold Street for another month. I forgot the exact length of time. I think it was over a month that we spent at Gold Street. And then we did another, dream pick, which command you would want. So I did choose TPF out of District 30. But irregardless of where your base command was, mine was District 30. With TPF, you can get on the train and be on the far end of the Bronx or up in Manhattan, out in Queens, and that's your TPF run for the night. So yeah, you learned the city, and you learned independence. The smart things to do and the not so smart things, not to do. So it was a good experience there.
And you're not alone, because if you call for backup, it's there. But I think it's interesting too, in that transit on the subway car, at least, you're probably the only cop in that car. And the
Mhm.
radios may or may not be working. I know transit guys have told me about trouble with that.
Yeah.
So that's where, to use a Bill Bratton term, the verbal judo comes into play. Even if you're a big, strong individual, guy or gal, who can handle themselves physically, how you talk to people can dictate how a situation's going to go or how it's not going to go. So early on, especially on those nighttime patrols, when you can get some rather interesting characters, shall we say, on those subway
Mhm.
trains, tell me about just learning to communicate with people on a one-on-one level.
The big thing about learning to communicate with people, the first thing that I would reflect on is what some of the senior guys took you aside when you got to the command. And basically, they said, if you immediately go to your gun, then you've lost the battle. But you've got to understand that the shield on your chest that you wear proudly, and the uniform that you wear, you wear it proudly, but don't balloon your head up to think that you can talk to people and treat people any old which way. So one of the things I've always tried to do is treat people the way I want to be treated. Um, the other thing that you learn quickly, don't get caught out there, especially on some of these train runs where, it could be 3 minutes between stations. 3 minutes could be a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of negativity can happen in 3 minutes. So you learn, the art of calming a situation down, the tone of your voice, the words that you choose to say, your body posture. Um, I always try to present a body posture that wasn't threatening, but also wasn't showing a state of cowardice. That if you challenge me, you're going to get a rude awakening. But I didn't want to insult anybody. But then here's the other thing that keeps you well. Don't underestimate the person that you're going up against. I've seen some two small guys. We were up in Times Square on one job, and these two young brothers, they were twin brothers, and they were small. But when I say it took six guys my size to hold each of them down, okay, these guys, they started saying, "Hey, let's show them what they taught us in Nam." and they went there. And if Miguel Ramos, Louis Vega, they were about their size, but these guys proved that they were not to be messed with. Now we, kept them under control, but still in all, if you underestimate somebody and what their potential is, you're setting yourself up, you're setting your partner up, to someone to get hurt. And that's the one thing that you held dear to, to your art of patrolling. I'm not going to do something that's going to cause my partner to be put in harm's way or put myself in harm's way. So, respect goes a long way. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, and it's always, and I don't mean to be facetious when I'm saying this, but two things come to mind. The smaller guys always give you a harder time because they're the ones with something to prove. Not so much the bigger guys. Now, granted, there are some big guys who can get violent. I'm not saying they don't. But for the most part, they tend to go down relatively easier. The smaller guys, it's that Napoleon complex, right? That little man syndrome. They just got to fight you. They just got to fight you.
And a fight you will have.
Yeah, you definitely will. And the other one is, I'll never forget what Joe Dolan told me when I had him on for my Bomb Squad miniseries last year. I asked him, best advice anyone ever gave you. And it sounds jacked up, but it's true, especially for a police officer. He's like, as an old timer once told him, be nice to everybody you meet, but always have a plan to kill them. Meaning, if it goes sideways, as you said, be prepared. Don't go into it thinking that. Try to be respectful, try to be courteous. But if it goes sideways, be ready. Be ready.
You don't walk into situations. It's one of the things that you learn from being an e-cop. You don't walk into situations blindsided. You don't have a tunnel vision. You put on your wide angle view lens so that you can see the whole picture, and you communicate. Communicate with your partners. You don't keep things to yourself. So there's clear communication, there's clear vision, and there's an action plan. And here's the thing, and this is when your team, your squad really gels, because when it goes south, so to speak, plans don't go as you intended them to. It's the gel of the team that causes you to really flow and react in a positive way so that everybody walks away healthy. And that's including whoever you're going after, or you're taking into custody, or if it's an EDP that you're looking to restrain. So if it goes south, everybody knows how to flow with the next person, and so that everybody comes out okay. It's not a good day when you got somebody who you're restraining or taking into custody and something happens to them. It's not a good day. It is a good day when you're able to put cuffs on, put restraints on, and turn them over to the precinct, or to put them in the back of a bus for transport to the hospital. And everybody, walks away and say, okay, here's another one. We did a good job.
Right. And that's what it's all about. Because I can't tell you how many guys have told me, Darrell, over the years, and we're talking with Darrell Summers, as volume 45 of the E-Men inside the NYPD's Emergency Service Unit. You don't want to fight, as we've talked about, but if there's going to be one, listen, when the cuffs go on, fight's over. That's it. Yeah. It's done. Move on. It's not personal. The worst thing you can do as a policeman, and this is something Cambria and I talked about as well, do not take it personal. They are mad at the uniform. They're not mad at you, Darrell Summers, or you, Mike Colón. It's the uniform they're mad at. And if you could just get the cuffs on, treat them as best as you can under the circumstances, and move on, that's a victory. And there was a lot of those back then.
Yes.
There were certainly a lot of those back then. You worked District 30, and I think it's an interesting point in your career because, listen, line of duty deaths in any agency affect an officer. An officer loss is an officer loss, but it always naturally hits differently when it's your agency. You came on the year after Irma Lozada got killed, but you were working when Bobby Venable got killed in '87, a few years later, when he got shot, responding to the reports of two guys with guns. Now, I don't know how well you knew Bobby, but nevertheless, when he was killed, here you are with only a couple years in the job. How much did that shake you?
Any officer who, and this may sound judgmental, and I'm not trying to be, but any officer who says that when you lose a member of the service, that it does not bother you, that it does not create an awakening. Nobody wants to truly Monday morning quarterback, but if the truth is told, you know, every officer to some degree is going to question and going to role play and what would I do? You know, how would I handle it? But anytime there's a loss of life, you're saddened because that's a brother, you know, that's a sister who has lost their life. They paid that ultimate sacrifice. So that's going to trouble you. And then, you know, you have to say, hey, I still have a role to do. I still have a job to do. And you have to get refocused back on, you know, the job at hand, which is, you know, the old saying that, you know, at the end of your shift, everybody wants to go home. You know, there's an old saying that can be really misunderstood. I would rather be, you know, tried by 12 rather than carried by 6. That's
Right.
an old saying that can definitely be misunderstood.
Oh, yeah.
But the bottom line to that statement is that we want to do everything that's positive to make sure that we go home to our families. And again, nobody goes out there wanting to do harm to society. You know, it's the unfortunate part of, you know, the police profession. You don't
Oh, yeah.
always see the niceties. You're not always experiencing that. You're seeing people at their worst. And some people handle it well, and some people don't handle it well.
Right. And there was a situation where it didn't matter to the people that saw two heavily armed guys if Bobby was a transit cop or not, or a housing cop or a city cop. The point is, they needed a cop in that moment. And so
Yeah.
they flagged down that van that had Bobby and a few others with them. And one of them, I think, stayed back to guard prisoners they were transporting. And that's what it is. It doesn't matter what agency you're representing. When it comes
Mhm.
time to do the job, it's time to do the job. And that's what Bobby was doing. And unfortunately, in that moment, he lost his life doing it. But his legacy lives on, and he's not forgotten. He's got a daughter that keeps his name alive, and I think there's a park named after him, and rightfully so. Before I get to EMRU, I don't want to gloss over your time at District 30. You're working in Brooklyn.
Mhm.
Interesting beat. For those not familiar with where District 30 is, this is a two-part question. Explain where it is, and also what you enjoyed most about working there.
Well, District 30 is downtown Brooklyn. It's in the 8-4 precinct. And it's right on at Hoyt and Skirmahorn. So the nice thing about working there, again, when I started there with TPF. And at your conclusion of your TPF assignment, pretty much when you were coming off of probation, for most, you know, of us at that time, you had the option. You can stay on TPF. You can request a command because by that time, the next class would be rotating out. But I chose to stay at District 30, traveling, you know, throughout the 5 boroughs. Well, primarily the 4 boroughs because you really didn't get into Staten Island. If you did, somehow you wound up on the ferry and you went over and you wound up coming back. But for the most part, you learned the city, you learned the different commands. And for me, District 30 was good. You know, they were welcoming to us when we got there. Again, my cousin, Vaughn Banks, Sr., he was one of the senior officers at that command. So that was a positive thing for me. So it's like coming home, you got family there and you got other friends there. And, you know, the commute home wasn't bad either.
No, I can imagine. I can
Mhm.
definitely imagine, especially for somebody like yourself that grew up in Brooklyn. It must have been a cinch to have that kind of a commute. EMRU opens up, and this is the interesting thing about transit. Housing, are you walking and doing verticals a lot? Yes, but you have a sector car that you work out of after a certain period of time. NYPD, same thing. After a while, you're working out of a sector car. Not so much in transit. I think I remember Anita telling me you had maybe one or two per district, one for transporting prisoners, and then the other one I think was for a supervisor to go around from point to point, and EMRU. So for the most part, being a below ground, you get used to working without that mobility. But EMRU is not like that. Here's a citywide unit where you can go anywhere. So for you, again, another two-part question. How did the opportunity open up, and what was your prior background? Because they're always looking for guys with certain skill sets in construction, welding, whatever it may be, that definitely piqued their interest and allowed you to get into that unit.
Well, again, I'm going to thank two people. Cousin Vaughn Banks, he's since deceased, but he lives on. He definitely lives on. So he spoke up for me. Sergeant Frank Kelly, as you know, when you make boss, you leave your command and you go to wherever they assigned you, and then you put in your request to come back. Well, Sergeant Frank Kelly was my TPF sergeant, and he had just got promoted to a sergeant, and he was working at District 30. And you do what's called a brag sheet. Basically, it lists all of your qualifications and stuff. So he pulled me aside one day and he says, "Hey, you're an instructor, you're an EMT at the time, you had all these other certifications." He said, "Are these legit?" And plus, I was already in the military at that time. And he wanted, "Are these legit? Are these active?" And I said, "Yeah, those are all legit." And he said, "Have you ever thought about going into the emergency unit?" And I said, "Yes, that's what I desire to do." I said, "But everybody's telling me that, 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line." So he said, "Listen, when you get off probation, make sure you send your request to me. Keep your nose clean, don't get, in any jam ups. But when you get off probation, send your request to me." Probation time came. I sent my request. The lieutenant, District 30 lieutenant, he endorsed it, but he endorsed it as saying requires more patrol time. So when I saw Sergeant Kelly, he kind of jumped on me and said, "What happened? I thought you want to come to emergency." I said, "I did. I submitted it." And he said, "But I never got it." I said, "I submitted it to the lieutenant." He says, "I told you to give it to me. Fill it out again and give it to me." Shortly thereafter, it came down from headquarters that I was being transferred to, at that time, Transit Emergency EMRU. And it was kind of funny because I came into transit and went through training with one of the larger classes in the history of transit, but my orders to EMRU were actually cut a week prior to the class that I went through training with. And there was rumors that because of, budget restraints and stuff, that class may not manifest. But Sergeant Said was the supervisor, and Sergeant Kelly was also there. They said, "You're not a part of that group. If this class doesn't go through, you'll be by yourself, and we'll put you through training as you go along." But thank God, everybody was able to, go into the same class, and we all went through training together.
And it wasn't your conventional rescue unit, and that, as Joe said, talked about when he was on. Yeah, it started as a medical aid unit, but it evolved basically into its own emergency service unit. You can go up on the bridges. You could respond to motor vehicle accidents or any other sort of technical rescue situation. Obviously, anything underground with animal conditions, subway fires, man-unders, you name it, EMRU did it. So it's a lot to learn, but the unit's growing. And what's good, as I've mentioned before, is for housing rescue, when they came later and you trained them, and for transit rescue, having the federal accreditation, there was access to a lot of different trainings. So in those early stages, what did you most enjoy? And was there a fear, whether it be heights or anything else, or enclosed spaces that you had to overcome, or were you squared away from the get?
I'm not going to say the one thing that you learn. Well, let me backtrack. I'm not going to say that there was anything particular that I can say, you know, it was a fear of heights or, you know, confined spaces, you know. I really didn't have any issues with that. But the one thing that you had come to learn and appreciate is the more you train, the more you become adept at trusting the equipment, knowing the limitations of that equipment, knowing the proper uses of that equipment, and when need be, knowing how to adapt to a situation and say, okay, you know, this may not work over here, or it wasn't designed to work, you know, under these circumstances, but I can do it safely based on, you know, the training that you went through. So training became really important. And then as I grew in the training, I became more confident. The more you did it, you know, the repetition, you became more confident. And I'm going to say this: confident, not cocky. Confident, not cocky. That's a key thing. Cockiness is going to get somebody hurt.
Right. And I'm glad you brought that up, because that's one thing now I'm seeing where I work, and it's a good thing, which is guys are confident. And because I ask guys that I work with at my job in the fire department, that I'm like, does it scare you? Or is there any, same question I just asked you, basically. And they're like, is there a respectful fear of it to a degree? Yeah, which keeps you honest. It's not, you know, an intimidation, but there's a respect for what you're doing, because you don't want to be careless with it. But there is a confidence there, because not only do you trust your equipment and your skill set as you go about doing it more and more, you trust those around you. They're never going to leave you in the lurch. So as long as one remembers that and doesn't overthink it, with time, no wonder there's so much confidence. Look at your equipment and look at the people around you.
And the and I just want to feed off of what you said as far as fear. You respected those things that had potential to take you out. In transit rescue, we were up under a train in a heartbeat. And here's the thing: there are many jobs that we've been on, and the first thing you learn to do is to confirm that power is off, third rail power is off. You also learn to deal with what type of train that you're dealing with. And is one car sitting on a live train and the other car sitting on a dead third rail where the power has been turned off? But because that one train is sitting on a live train, you have a bridging occurring. So now you're electrifying that other aspect. And you needed to know which trains presented that potential of danger for you. So if anything, yeah, the third rail, you learn to respect. You definitely, because when you know, there's jobs that you walk into the station, from the time you hit the top steps of that station, you smell burning flesh. It's like this person is DOA, you know, and you get down there and yeah, the person is DOA because they got fried by the third rail. So you learn, you know, a good respect for that. If you want to say fear, okay, well, you don't let the fear control you, but you respect it so that you can move on and do your job.
I think that's, again, nail on the head. You hit it perfectly there. And there was a lot of that going on back then. And I think John Bushing mentioned something pivotal as well, which is, as you said, they would put you under the train during trainings. Was it a controlled setting? Yeah, but you learned right then and there, get comfortable. And, you know, to your point about keeping calm, Franco mentioned something where it's like, Mike, we were on jobs where they accidentally turned the power back on. And if there was ever a point where certain bodily fluids might be leaving you in that moment, it might be right then and there. But to your point, you fall back on that training, you stay calm, and you have a respectful fear of it. There was a few big jobs during this time. One of them, I know from the conversation with Franco you were on, I'll ask you about in a bit. But derailments, They don't happen to a fairly large degree, and that's good. But 1991 occurs in Union Square. Transit Rescue was there. I don't know if you were there for that, but if you were, what do you recall from it?
Well, actually, no, I was not there.
Not there.
Actually, it was August of 91. And August of 91, I was actually on my honeymoon in Hawaii at the time. And we were actually, my wife and I were actually coming back from a luau, and it was breaking news. It had hit, and we just got glued, to the TV, watching all of the, the footage go by. But I've been on the tracks at 14th Street on many occasions, but on that particular job, no, I was enjoying the fun in the sun with my wife on our honeymoon. So
Yeah,
that was
not a bad place to be. Although you missed a big job there. I mean, listen, hey, if there's ever a valid reason to miss a job, honeymoon in Hawaii, I think, is one of them. But one thing I was going to bring up is Charlie Caperna, not on this show, but in the episode Cops, in that segment where Kenny's driving him around right before they go to a stabbing call, he was mentioning we have about 4 trucks, sometimes 5 and 6, covering the whole city. And I thought ESU was small in the grand scheme of things compared to how many cops are in the NYPD. Transit Rescue is even smaller. In that here you are covering 4 of the 5 boroughs. You didn't cover Staten Island, but you had everything else, and you're getting around without GPS. You knew Brooklyn pretty well, but as far as, especially once you started driving those REPs, learning the rest of the city and where was what, tell me about that process, especially where time is of the essence. And if there's a big job going on, obviously you got to get there quickly.
Well, I'll backtrack and talk about TPF. One of the things that I mentioned is that with TPF, Tactical Patrol Force with Transit Police, okay, you learned the city, you learned the subway system. So you learned the landmarks. You did not always have the opportunity to go up into the streets, but you learned how to read that subway map. So that was critically beneficial for EMRU, especially because we're responding to those stations. But doing that really ingrained in you a sense of direction, getting around, the city. The time of day, you knew what avenues not to go through, what tunnels not to try to get through. And then there was things depending on which shift you worked. In the beginning phase of my time in EMRU, I did the rotating. And then, in the rotating at that time, you would do either the day shift or the 4 to 12 shift. And then you had the overnights. But then I gravitated towards the overnights and did majority of my career on overnights. But even still, getting around, you had to embrace that transit map. And then as you work certain areas more and more, you learn the streets better and better. You learn the precincts that they cross through better and better. And it just made it easier for you to get around.
I'll harken back to something backtracking on my end I mentioned in the last episode. Again, going back to my job, a lieutenant at my department, Sean Usilla, lovely man, 25 years on the job, and quite a few of them as lieutenant, was mentioning in relation to our city in West Haven, Connecticut, same thing, know your district, know your city. Because if you take the time, even when there's, and this was a fascinating point he brought up, even when there's not jobs, even when you're not en route to something, if you're just driving around and you're taking stock of what's in certain neighborhoods and where these certain locations are, when a job does come in, whatever it may be, you know where it is. Oh yeah, that's that building. Oh yeah, they have this, and you can even pinpoint certain features on the building that can be critical when you're responding to emergencies. He was talking about it in a fire sense, but it doesn't matter what you're doing. Fire, police, EMS, knowledge of your district, knowledge of your neighborhood, knowledge of your city, that could be the difference between somebody living and dying at jobs. It's very, very essential thing. Commissioner Bratton made mention of this too, and I know ESU had them for a long time. Transit also had them, and He credited EMRU in my interview with him with this, and that's the airbags. Because for these man under jobs, you have to keep the subway moving. It doesn't mean you don't care about the person. Somebody who's gravely injured, if not deceased, you want to treat them with as much respect as possible because they're a human being at the end of the day, and somebody loves them. But at the same time, if the transit system is stopped for too long, money does get lost, and that's not me being callous. It is a fact. And that's where the airbags came into play. So tell me about utilizing those and other methods which were critical to respectfully extract bodies, but move it along at such a quick process the subway wasn't out of service for too long.
The big thing when you talk about the subway system being out of service, what plays a large role in that is when we call to get power turned off. Power turning off, you're turning off a grid of power. So you may turn off several stations, okay, where power is turned off. But here's the key thing: what the Transit City, always wanted to do is get whatever trains that are in the tunnels into the stations, or get them where they can buddy up with the train that's already in the station, and then they can exit people out. They have a way out rather than keeping them trapped in the tunnel. So that's one concern. In regards to, man unders, not every man under is an airbag job. Not every space case is an airbag job. Okay. When you have to use those airbags, okay, and granted, we trained with those airbags left and right. Like I said, you would not use it. You wouldn't think to use of an airbag for an elevator job. But there were times if you had a person trapped, generally in those cases, if someone is trapped in an elevator, they're not in good shape and they're probably deceased, but you're trying to move that elevator to unpin them. So that's an avenue that you would use it. But within the transit system, if you had to use those airbags, number one is not just running down with one or two airbags. You got all of your cribbing, you got your bottles, your Scott tanks, okay, and then you got your regulators. So all of those were in, your man under kits, and you're running down. And of course, the equipment is heavy. So you try to grab, you try to team up with whichever truck, whichever EMRU unit that was on scene first. You try to team up so you can help them get the equipment down or up if you're on an overhead structure. And once those airbags come out and you start setting up that cribbing, it takes a minute at most to lift a train. But you have to lift that train and set your cribbing in such a way that you're lifting that train in a manner that it's not going to derail the train. Because keep in mind, you're underneath that train. And if you derail it, that's an issue because you got people trapped under there. And whatever body part that is sitting, that train is sitting on, it becomes an issue with that. A lot of the discussions that we had when it came to man unders where we had to use those bags, you had personnel within the upper ranks of the transit authority saying, well, just roll the train over that person. That's not the correct answer, okay? Because there was an instance where that happened, and okay, where did the body go? And the body got hooked underneath the train and dragging it along. So that's an issue. So, and then you still have to turn around and now understand that, number one, this is a crime scene. So you're expanding that crime scene, which is an issue, okay? And then you're having to go and try to police up whatever else that may have been dragged along the tracks. And that's not an easy thing, a simple thing to do. And then with the space cases, your biggest concern with a space case is that you may have somebody who's alive. but you don't run up and touch that person until you know exactly where they're at, because the upper torso spins one way, the bottom torso spins the other way, and they elongate. So the question happens is, where is that bottom portion of the torso? What is it sitting on? What is it in contact with? And your first obligation is to confirm whether or not that person is in contact with the contact shoe for the train, the third rail itself, because there are stations where the third rail sits under the platform. So it's, a part of your training that you learn, how to drop that airbag in quickly and move it after you've made sure that the scene is safe for you to function.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because it harkens back the job from that episode of Cops where Charlie Caperna's on it, Franco's on it, and so is Sergeant Mike Wacer. And that's exactly what they were doing, to your point about proper tactics, which is, okay, let's see where the victim is. And the victim was DOA, unfortunately. I don't know if it was somebody who was pushed or if it was a suicide, but either way, it was DOA. And they took a look at where he was positioned first before they did anything else. For that reason, it is a crime scene. You're going to have transit detectives asking, okay, did anybody see what happened? Trying to get evidence on the tracks. There was body parts on the tracks, not to get graphic, but that's what was described. So all of that you have to take into consideration, because what you don't want to do is make the detective's job harder. You have the respect factor for the victim, but also the case factor that's going to come into play afterwards. And they did a good job. They were able to clear the victim quickly, remove him respectfully, but also keep the crime scene in place so that transit detectives could get in and figure out just what exactly happened in the first place. And to your point about space cases, it's a horrific job to go to, because and that person knows what's going to happen. And that's one thing that does stick out to me. And I recall a conversation, not to keep name dropping, but you bringing these things up brings back different conversations I've had with guys over the years. Sal Formica talked about it with me, which is you'd almost rather go there once they're deceased, because it's over. Not when it's a prolonged process where that guy knows or that girl knows, I'm in this situation, I'm not getting out of it. And as soon as they move this car, I'm gone. And Bill Ryan, who retired out of Arson Explosion in the chat, you saw his ad earlier. There's I don't know rather if you ever watched the show. It was a great show in the 90s, Homicide: Life on the Street. And his question was, there was an episode with Vincent D'Onofrio, who later played Detective Robert Gorin on Law and Order: Criminal Intent. Same thing, a space case happened in that episode. And the late great Andre Braugher, who played Detective Pembleton, is speaking with him before they moved the train, trying to figure out what happened. Did you ever see that episode? He wants to know.
I've seen, yeah.
Yeah.
So when you see those episodes, again, you Monday morning quarterback, and you turn around and you say, okay, would I have handled it this way? Would I have handled it another way? And it becomes a learning platform for me. That's just the way my head goes.
Yeah, and that's a good way to look at it. It's always an education. I'll ask, because my producer brings up a good point. He just texted this to me. Has anybody ever survived? So, once the torso turns, it's over, but just a space case where somebody's pinned, depending on where they're pinned. Have you ever heard of anybody surviving that?
You've had some survivors, yeah. Generally, if it's pelvic and above, they're not surviving. If it's, pelvic, below the pelvic, you have a better chance. Now, they may have some serious disfigurement to their lower extremities, but yes, we've pulled out, those that have, lived, okay, because the body didn't get sucked all the way down. Unfortunately, the majority of them, no. I'm quite sure you heard of surfing, or, you're riding. Well, there's two types of surfing, one on the top of the train, but the other one, you're holding onto the doors and you're riding the train as it exits the station. Generally, with those type, they either get, they fall, they lose balance, and they get sucked under longitudinally. It gets sucked under. And then other times they go into the support I-beams on the platform. So you find them that way. And, I've had teenagers that you go down there, and it's a DOA, it's a recovery.
Yeah. It's so senseless and such a waste. I mean, there was a kid in Brooklyn that got killed doing that recently, 15 years old, smart kid, good student in school, not a kid that got into any trouble. One night, again, teenage stupidity. He wanted to be cool and go with his friends on the top of the train, ends up hitting his head on one of the electrical rails, I should say. And there's a kid with a bright future ahead of him. That was his mother's only child. And now she doesn't have her child. And now that kid's future is wiped away because of one dumb decision. So I don't get the appeal of that. Maybe it's an adrenaline thing. But even then, there's better ways to get an adrenaline rush than doing something that dumb. Go work out. Go to the gym. Go ride a bike. Go do anything safely. But just don't do that. Now, this job, as I said, I would ask you about. I know you were working for. You and Franco are partners in the REP, February 26, 1993. When the job comes over the air for the Trade Center. Where were you guys? And once you got down there, tell me about the climb up with, I think, Franco and Sergeant Said.
So what was funny about the beginning of that World Trade event, Franco and I had actually just gotten lunch. And we had pulled over downtown along the water edge to sit. You try to find a quiet spot, because the one thing with transit rescue, you didn't have the opportunity to come back to quarters, for lunch or whatever. You basically, when you went out, you stuck out. And if you went into a command, you went into a command to use the facilities or whatever else, but mostly everything was done outside. But that particular day, Franco and I had just gotten lunch. And we heard the radio, and did we hear that correctly? And it came over again. And then, we responded in. If I'm not mistaken, we were Rescue 2 that day. And we responded into Lower Manhattan. We gave our location as far as where we exited the vehicle. And at that particular time, we grabbed rescue, our rescue gear. We had grabbed our Scott packs and everything, and we're going into the structure. And the climb up, initially when we got on location, you had to get a sense of bearing as to where you wanted to start climbing during your ascent. And when we found that stairwell, we were going up while those were coming down. But they had made the I think it was 30 some odd floor that we went up to, that we had to get to, where it was like a stabilization point where you can get and either exchange, whichever floor they had a cafeteria on. That's where we made it up to. But the funny thing about that, when you saw the level of equipment that was being dropped in the stairwells going up, because carrying all of that stuff, and trying to be functional with all of that stuff, it became an issue. So people were staging gear along the stairwells going up, and then when you're trying to get somebody out of there to assist them in going back down, because that's what we were doing at one point, going up and then bringing people down. So this became a difficult, environment to work in, with all of the chaos and stuff that was going on.
You're talking about 210-story skyscrapers on top of that. Heavy equipment, as you said. The air packs, I think, have about an hour of air in them, unless you're breathing super fast, and it goes pretty quickly if you're not careful with that. And as you mentioned, the injuries too, because you had over 1,000 injuries at this scene. It's not just you guys. FD's there, ESU's there, Port Authority Police ESU is there. So is EMS, which was separate from the FDNY at the time. So you had hands with this, and I think Tim Farrell, when he was on, talked about the rappelling operations up top. But what floor did you guys get to before Sergeant Said must have said, all right, we've done all we could, let's just start heading back down?
Well, Sergeant Said it was really Franco and myself, because Sergeant Said came, the supervisors came in their vehicles. Franco and I were there. Miguel Ramos, Louis Vega they were also there, and we, teamed up. And I want to say we got up to about the 40-something floor before we, just started assisting with bringing people down. I don't remember going above the 40. It was like mid 40s on floor. I don't remember going above that. That we started helping to, rescue and get people out of there.
Yeah, it was a prolonged operation to that point, the biggest one the city had had. Everybody did a great job, considering the circumstances, but it was definitely a wake-up call. Not that New York City thought they weren't, that they were immune to terrorism. I think going back to the 20s, there have been evidence of terrorist attacks taking place with great devastation, unfortunately. You can go back to 1920 and the Wall Street bombing, but this was one that definitely changed the game because, as many has pointed out, this was the first time it had been done by adversaries from overseas, adversaries from abroad, as opposed to domestic terrorism. Before I continue, Tommy Ridges says hello. He sends his regards. And in regards to you, he says he was not just a good E-man. He was a great man who I learned many life lessons from, and I hope my brother is doing well. So he sends his regards. And Franco Barberio sends his regards. He says, looking great, Darrell. Such a great E-man, an instructor, always a calm presence during even the most chaotic of scenes. He pops up his LinkedIn user, unfortunately there. Doesn't say his name, but I just checked LinkedIn. That's him commented. So shout out to those two guys for tuning in tonight.
Great guys.
Both great guys. Tommy, I had on the show. Franco, I'm still working on. Hopefully I can get him on soon. You get the subway bombing of you were going to say something? My apologies.
Yeah. Tommy Ridges, I got to give a tremendous shout out for him. Tommy went on to get his law degree. But Tommy Ridges was the spark that I needed. There's a lot of talent in ESU, a lot of talent. And Tommy Ridges, I definitely accredited him for giving me that push to say, hey, you got all of this background. You got, only so much more to do before you're qualified to sit in a PA program. So shout out to him and thank you, because he said, taking one step at a time. I took his advice, and I'm a PA today because of that. So shout back out to him, and many thanks to him.
Good man, Tommy, and a smart guy too. Very smart guy, and I'll tell you, it's funny to see how many guys have done great things post ESU with the knowledge they've gained. You look at Vick Politi, same thing. I think Vick's a doctor now. Richie Winwood's a PA down in where I think he's in the Carolinas now. So quite a few of these guys have taken their knowledge just from the medical side alone. Look at what Andy Burchak's doing now with his consulting, and a lot of that rooted in his knowledge of EMS. So it's a great thing. It's a great thing. And ESU really sets you up well for the rest of your career. If you're able to do that kind of work in New York City, there's no telling what kind of private sector opportunities can open up for you once you put in your papers and retire. As I was going to say, and even if you weren't there for this job, this was another, okay, this could happen at any time. It can really hit the fan moment when Eddie Leary lets off the firebomb on the 4 train in December of 94. Another big job. Not sure if you were there for that. Were you, or were you off for this one?
I wasn't there for that. The thing that happened with that particular job is that, and it pretty much happens after any type bomb incident, and it did with this one, where you got multiple calls, multiple stations with concerns for, a potential bomb. And we can always go back to the Kentucky Fried Chicken box at, outside of 1PP. So if it looks like, smells like, if there's a thought that it is, then a 911 call was made, so I wasn't particularly there for that one, but I remember the repercussions of that particular job, because we had multiple runs where, you're shutting down stations. And as you already said, time is money. And the one thing I learned over the years, New York City Transit Authority does keep, very close watch on the productivity of dollars coming in versus dollars lost.
Oh, yeah. And still to this day. And Billy Ryan mentioned in the chat he was there for that. And I remember that, Billy. And for those of you in the chat who are new to the show, check out the miniseries Tales from the Boom Room, Profiles of the NYPD's Arson, Explosions, and Bomb Squad. We covered that job for that miniseries with Billy Ryan and Dan McNally from the Bomb Squad. And to your point about that line, I heard that line from Don Sadawi, also from the Bomb Squad a while ago, where he said this, and it's a kind of a trick question. He's like, what does a bomb look like? Meaning it could look, it could look like anything. that Kentucky Fried Chicken box outside of 1 pp on New Year's Eve 1982. Who would have thought? Who would have thought? Until an officer walked up to it and unfortunately found out, survived, but was very seriously injured. So that's kind of the last big standalone transit rescue by itself job, because then comes April of 95. And it's not like the merge came out of nowhere. It had been talked about for a long time. Koch wanted it. He didn't succeed. Dinkins wanted it. He didn't succeed. Giuliani wanted it. And Giuliani basically played bully ball and got it, because what he did, if I remember correctly, is he threatened to withhold the payrolls from the transit cops. So he put the union in a no-win spot, to where the union had been fighting it in court. And they said, finally, all right, well, there's nothing we could do about this. Merger it is. Some guys feel one way about it, other guys feel another. And I won't ask you that question because it's irrelevant now, but it's definitely a big change to go from one agency and one way of doing things and to a new agency. But it's a great move for your career in retrospect. So to go from transit rescue, great unit, but there's limitations there, to now in a department as large as the NYPD, where the opportunity to do anything, a la Tommy Ridges, for example, is there. Tell me about that transition in 95 from EMRU into ESU, and how long it took you to acclimate.
So keep in mind, myself, Franco Berarducci, Mike Pashota, oh boy. There's a few other of us who were training instructors, and to those who your names, I see your faces and I'm having a blank on your names, but I mean no disrespect to anybody, because everybody played a vital role. But anyway, for those of us who were instructors, okay, we got acclimated sooner than everyone else, because when we got told of the merge, there had to be cross training to take place before we actually closed our commands and were assigned to the various ESU trucks. And even prior to that, as being one of the regular instructors for EMRU, I had cross training, with ESU. It wasn't my first exposure to them. I had cross training with fire department rescue, because we would train them in utilizing the airbags. But once everybody went through what we consider to be essential training so that we can all function safely, the merge went. I mean, the biggest hurdle, I would say that from my personal perspective, is getting over the political tone of the merger. The biggest accomplishment and credit to the merger is that you brought qualified people from housing, qualified people from NYPD, qualified people from Transit EMRU to the table. And it became a congealed, functional unit with an enormous amount of training, an enormous amount of latitude, longitude that was afforded because we expanded the horizons of what we're capable of. And it's no discredit to any one particular, NYPD ESU prior to the merge, they had their realm and they did a good job at it. Mm-hmm. Transit Emergency prior to the merge had their realm and did an excellent job. And though housing was the newest ones there in the field of emergency response, in that short time, they too, congealed and formulated a unit that was valued. So now it's to the city's benefit that all three units were merged. And from my perspective, it was a good move because for three different agencies to show up on the scene and there's a tick for tack, so to speak, as to who's in charge, that does nobody any good.
Right.
But when we all show up, wearing an ESU, patch, none of us are being discredited because we're one. And it was a benefit. It was a benefit. In certain respects, each of the agencies, if we were speaking truthfully, your eyes or your vision, I'll go back to that wide angle view, became broader because your scope of training and your proficiency with that training also grew. And it's a good family. It's a good family. I wouldn't trade it. I wouldn't go back on it.
And as I've said many times before, and I'll keep saying it because it always bears repeating, that stretch before 9/11, post-merger, 1995 to 2000, best stretch in emergency service history. And again, that's no discredit to any of the eras before or any of the eras since. By all means, every era has been great. That, in my personal opinion, is the best stretch for everything that you just said. You go to a housing project for an elevator job. Who knows that better than the housing rescue cops? They did that. That was their bread and butter for the short time they were around before they got put on loan and then merged. Anything in the subway, whatever it may be, doesn't even have to be a man under. You guys know that. And Transit Rescue had almost 20 years worth of history before they merged, formed in the fall of 77, didn't merge with the NYPD until 1995. You had 2 years in one truck. Any truck is great to work in because it's a different experience for each. Hollywood, of course, we know why they call it Hollywood, the short-lived True Blue show. And of course, part of it too is they're always in the news because if it happens in Manhattan, there's going to be news to document it. So working there from 95 to 97 with legends, in that truck, like a Mark DeMarco, for example, and many others too, that walked through those doors. Tell me about how much fun that was and what jobs from that 2-year stretch alone stick out, because in one truck, you get just about everything.
One truck, good experience. I mean, Hollywood Squad, you're in Manhattan, the lights and cameras, action rolling all the time. So, that aspect was good. Your bridge jobs, your jumper jobs, you mentioned elevators, your elevator jobs, they, were a lot. You had a lot of rescue jobs. Each truck has a flavor, so to speak, of its own. But the experience at one truck, it prepared me, for when high angle rescues came into play. You're in a truck. If you're the operator versus the recorder knew that they were suiting up while you're rolling, to the scene. So if it was a water job, you're putting on, your dry suit. If it's a high angle job, you're putting on, your Laracus gear at that time before we went to Roco gear. But you're suiting up. And so that when you pull up on the scene and you step out of the REP or you step out of the truck, you're stepping into play. You're not waiting to set up. So that part, it was a lot of good training. Of course, with any new environment, there's a transition period. You're learning them, they're learning you. Again, when it came down to the aspect of valuing what that person brought to the table, not paying attention to where they came from was irrelevant. The fact is they brought value to the table that made truck 1 better, truck 2 better, truck 3 better, truck 4 better, truck 5 better, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Down at the field, it made us all better. And it made us one. So, and that was my experience. And I'll tell you that the guys at Truck 1, they embrace, Craig Hunter, was my partner there. Well, he was my partner throughout. Franco and I were partners a lot, in EMRU. After the merger, he went to the Bronx. And Craig and I went to one truck and then wound up at a truck. But, even Jimmy Vargas going back, to transit days, good guys that I worked with. But Craig and I did that transition. And as we had nothing but good things to say about them, they had nothing but good things to say about us. When the jobs came down, the question is, did you handle the job? Mm-hmm. That was it. And we came back, we broke bread, we laughed. If there was something to discuss, to say, hey, could we have did this or could we have did that to improve, our performance? That was all handled. So it was a good thing. It was a good. Again, there's a transition period, but Craig and I have been friends from military. We served together, and ESU. Yeah, we both we met in the military. Ronnie Perkins. Ronnie Perkins used to be the EMT instructor down at the field. Actually, when they were over by Shea Stadium, where they used to teach the EMT course at, Ronnie Perkins was him and I were in the same medical unit. Craig Hunter came off of active duty, and Ronnie said, "Hey, there's another guy here that's coming to the unit. He's transit police." And I'm like, "Okay." And we met, and we've been brothers since. Craig is an awesome, awesome, awesome guy. All my brothers are, but Craig and I, that's my big brother. That's my big brother.
I got nothing but good things to say about Craig. I'm trying to get him on the show because I know when I interviewed Sal a while ago, he was in the chat and he's popped up in the chat every now and then. So Craig, if you're listening to this, brother, man, please come on the show because I really want to have you on. He was a great E-man. And I don't know, before I move on from one truck and get to 8 truck in 1997, I don't know if you were in the same squad as him, but I do want to ask you about him because I'm sure you crossed paths with him. Mike Hansen, another legend of ESU. He's not with us anymore. He died of 9/11 cancer.
Unfortunately, Mike passed.
Yeah. Working with a guy like him, if at all, what are your memories of him?
Mike and I actually, we taught together because you remember Mike was also a nurse.
Okay. Sure.
And, he was one of the instructors who was well respected. Okay. Mike was one of the type of persons that if you're wrong, you're wrong. If you're right, you're right. He's not going to blow smoke your way to make you feel good just because, my working with him as an instructor down at the field was a good experience. I learned, from him. He learned from me, but he was senior to me, as an instructor, and then his nursing career. I'm not sure if at that time, well, 93, 94, I think I had become a paramedic by that time. But it was a plus factor being around him. It was a plus factor. He has some good jokes. So there was some laughing there. And then, but he, I'll say it this way: he handled business and he handled it professionally.
Mm-hmm. You run across anybody that worked with Mike Hansen, nobody, not a single soul, has a bad word to say about that man. He's one of those people, and there's people like this that you come across in your life. If you have a problem with them, something's wrong with you, And Mike Hansen was one of those guys. If you didn't like Mike Hansen, that was a you problem. Something was wrong with you, not him. Because he was a gem, and I wish I would have gotten to know him. Before, just actually, last note on one truck, because you had a lot of great sergeants there. Did you have Lampkin, Amendoleri? Who was your sergeant in your specific squad?
It was Lampkin was our sergeant.
Yeah. All right. Again, great guy, great boss to work for. What are your favorite memories of working for a guy like that who just retired from his private sector job now too? So he's retired.
Well, the thing as the bosses, especially your truck boss, is the fact that, okay, in the truck, there's ragging going back and forth. Right. Everybody's going to rag one another. But the thing that he came to us, he treated us with tremendous respect. And these are the rules of the house. This is how I run my shop. Let's work together as a team and let's get the job done. So again, Craig and I had a great time. And the bosses, that were there, your squad boss and stuff, really, it was a good experience. It's a good experience.
Yeah, oh, he's a great guy. I love John. He was my first ESU interview I ever did, so it's thanks to him, as I've said several times before on this show. This mini series is where it is. And speaking of One Truck Before 8, Dave Norman, hi. Yeah, I know you're listening. Come on the show, pal. Daily reminder to Dave Norman, who I've been trying to get on for a while. Come on the show. I keep teasing him about it. He's like, you think I'm interesting? I'm like, yes, I do. That's why I keep asking you. So there's another reminder, Dave, for when you inevitably listen to this. So going to 8 and 97, again, great house there. You got Maddie there. I think Rodney had gotten back. He had been promoted to sergeant, left for a while. I think he's back by this point. You got Ronnie Griffith, who got there in 97 as well, and Craig. So great house to work. You had been in Brooklyn before during your time, particularly in District 30. So this had to be a homecoming for you of sorts.
It was a good thing. I will say, leaving One Truck, coming to 8 Truck, there was a bittersweet aspect to it because you got to really appreciate the guys that you work with. Right. The move to 8 Truck initially was about your commute, and one thing's you try to position yourself, where is it going to make your commute easier. So that was one of the rationales behind moving. But then also Craig's uncle, Sergeant Hunter, worked 8 Truck. So the aspect of, kind of walking in that path, and Craig and I were partners, and we didn't want to separate. And we said, hey, let's do this. Let's move. We were prepared when we left One Truck to go to 8 Truck, because one of the things that you mentioned, Sergeant Lampkin, one of the things the sergeant needs to make the decision off of is, when do you become chauffeurized? Now, the one thing that I will tell you that One Truck is a good experience is becoming a chauffeur driving through the streets of Manhattan. First of all, pulling that truck out of One Truck quarters, that's something that you want to make sure you're doing, and going up and down 20th Street to make sure that you're not tearing up any cars along the way. So and once we got to 8 Truck, it was just a continuation. We were welcomed. Again, there's still some transitioning that goes on, but by that time, 8 Truck wasn't strange to us. We had, you know that you can show up at your command. Okay, you're flying the 5 Truck tonight, or you're flying out to 3 Truck or 4 Truck or 6 Truck. So you got to learn, the division that way, which was a good thing.
Yeah, it builds camaraderie. That's the one thing amongst many things I've always liked about emergency, the flying aspect. You get to know how certain trucks work, and that's something that Scott Zink and I were talking about in the last ESU episode I did. He was primarily a 5 Truck guy, sans for a brief stint in 8 that he had. But that was the thing. All right, let me go fly over here and let me see how they do it in 3 Truck. Okay, they get a lot of MVAs over in 10 Truck. Okay, so at least I know how they're working in case I ever got to come fly out here, or we get a job that's big enough to where, we're responding from another borough. So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because those Big Macs, as I've talked about with both FD and PD guys, I don't know how you guys did it. The REP, okay, it's small enough to where you can squeeze it through. The Big Mac trucks, man, oh my God, you had to be some type of driver.
You had to respect that truck. You definitely have to respect the truck, but it's a proud moment. You're pulling that truck out of quarters, the lights come on as soon as the garage gate, door opens up, lights are on. And when you roll out and you're hitting the sirens, and when I say you're pushing that truck, I'm saying you're pushing that truck responsibly, not driving like, a crazed person. But to be able to take that truck out, knowing everything that's in that truck, and the fact that the last thing that you want to do is mess up with that vehicle, because it's going to impact, the division as far as if that truck goes out of service, because of, an overzealous operator.
Right. And I've been in the 13th precinct, or down to the 13th precinct, I should say, to see One Truck on a handful of occasions. And that street is so darn narrow. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh my God. I saw Chris Williams bring it out a little while ago when I was hanging out down there. And I'm like, how do they do it? And I'll ask you real quick, and this applies not just to one truck, but just driving that truck in general. Paul Hashagen, who was the chauffeur of FDNY Rescue One, told me this, that his key sometimes was driving into the traffic, not in a reckless way, but his point was if you're driving towards these cars, they're going to make room. Because if they see you coming behind them, maybe not so much, but if they see you coming at them, it's a big intimidating sight to see a heavy truck like that coming at you, full blast lights and sirens. So that was key for him. What were the keys for you, rather it be one truck or a truck, to get people to, for lack of a better way to ask the question, get the heck out of your way?
Knowing how to, the air horn, which really whoever was the recorder knew how to use that air horn. But then, for yourself, have I gone against traffic? Yeah, there's plenty of times I've gone against traffic. You try to flow with, but when you're going against traffic, you definitely are more attentive, not only to the oncoming traffic, but the traffic that you're passing, doing what they think is the right thing to do, which in essence is the wrong thing to do. So you have your responses, your reactions have to be on point, and you learn how to use those mirrors, your blind spot mirrors. You learn how to use those things to keep you and that vehicle on the right track. Actually, one truck, one of the biggest times we had to go up in the 2-truck area for a job, and we were truck only. And we're going up Broadway, and it was during the snow started to come. And that was probably one of the first times that I drove, the big truck in hazardous, conditions as far as the roads, because the streets were slippery. And going to that job, making it uptown to where the job was, and then getting back to the quarters with no incidents, that's a good night. And it's a good feeling too. But then, on other big jobs, there was a hostage job in it was 10 trucks area. And, we had to get from, 8 truck to 10 truck, and you're driving, the truck to make it there. So again, learning, knowing how to commute throughout the city becomes important. When they, call a 1013 and, you start responding, you need to know the most direct route there. Not, I think I know. You need to know the most direct route there.
Yeah, especially with the truck like that. The quicker you can get there, as we said earlier, responsibly, the better, because that equipment on that truck, whatever the job may be, is critical to have. And that's not to diminish the roles of the REPs. They're essential to operations too. But there's nothing like that big truck, as you know, and it doesn't matter which truck you're operating out of in the 5 boroughs. The point is that truck is essential to operations. For something like 8, you'd go to the Brooklyn Bridge a lot naturally, because you get a lot of EDP jobs up there where they're threatening to jump. And, thankfully, most times they did not. And you meet one truck there, and sometimes you're racing one truck to get to that particular jumper job. But there's other jobs too in that borough. Now, what makes Brooklyn unique to the other 4 is you have 3 trucks in that borough alone, 6, 7, and 8, because the borough is so darn large. What would you say you enjoyed most about working in 8? What were the common jobs that you went to a lot in 8?
When I went to 8 truck, we did the overnights. And when I say the number of tactical jobs that we've done, you lose count. There was a lot of tactics in 8 truck. And when I say we congealed, as a team, Sergeant DeCandia was the U5 boss. Sergeant DeCandia never micromanaged us. We pulled up to the scene and we gave updates, and we did the job, and we did the job proficiently. When there's times that he pulled up just as we pulled up. There's times that he's pulled up and, you're already at the door as a bunker team, you're already at the door and you're ready to engage. And then you hear him in the back, okay, let's make entry. He's there. And the times where, we had to take action before he was there, I would say that Sergeant DeCandia, from my experience, never walked away from a truck saying, these guys are a bunch of loose cannons. But I've heard him on many occasions say, hey, you guys handled this job good. Thank you. You make my job easier. And then that's it. So, but a lot of tactics. The bridges are there. Craig and I had a job on the Williamsburg. It was a jumper on the Williamsburg Bridge. And, we get over there. And again, like I said, the experience from one truck, you learn to suit up. So we suited up. He was the driver that day. I was the recorder. I'm gearing up. And when we pulled up, Craig grabbed a rope bag. He went and tied off. I'm tying in. He gave me the thumbs up. I'm going over the side because there was a jumper. He was already over the side. There was an officer from one of the precincts, Manhattan precincts, that had a handcuff on the individual. And, but that officer's arm was being pulled. And of course, the person who was trying to commit suicide was not there playing nicely. He kept moving about trying to get loose. So, Craig tied me off. I went over, I cradled the guy. And, when that happened, we were able to uncuff the guy and then get him back onto the bridge. So it's, those type jobs that you have that, they're good jobs, they're good experiences. And the trust that's there. I never remember asking Craig, hey, are you sure? He gave me the thumbs up or I gave him the thumbs up and we went at it. And that's it.
And that's the best.
That's the statement of every ESU team, every ESU partner. It's just Craig Hunter and I were partners, for majority of my ESU time.
Mm-hmm. Didn't mean to cut you off there. My apologies. But that's the best thing I was going to say for anybody in that situation, to have that feeling that the guy next to you, the gal next to you, they got it. I don't have to worry about them, because you already have enough things going through your mind at these scenes. But if you know your partner's under control and you don't got to worry, okay, did he bring his A game today? Is she on her game today? When that concern is already eliminated out and goes out the window because you know that person's squared away, everything else gradually begins to fall into place. And, again, not just him, but like you said, anybody in ESU, any partner group you could say that about. And that's a testament to the training. You mentioned DeCandia, and he just passed away, sadly.
Yes.
Thank you for mentioning him, because he was truly the king of the overnight.
Yes,
there was an E-man's E-man, and man, it's a crying shame. I wish I would have gotten a profile of him. Another guy that worked the overnight, though, and quite often, I might add, in a truck was Rod. Sergeant Gillis, of course, I'm talking about for the audience. Getting to work with a guy like him, another guy you won't find anybody with a bad word to say about. What was it like to have a boss like that?
Well, I worked with Rodney, okay. Before he picked up the stripes, we were so proud of Rodney. When he picked up the stripes, we Truck 8, and it's no different from any of the other trucks. I'm just speaking of my experience in Truck 8. But Truck 8 embraces you, encourages you, and, gives you the support that you need to say, hey, you're going to do this. You're able to do this. You're doing a great job at this. And Rodney was one of those people. Tremendous respect for Rodney. Tremendous respect. His brother, Rodney's brother, and I actually played high school football together.
Oh, really? Wow.
And it was funny because Rodney had invited us over to his house one time, and I saw his brother walk. I'm like, what you doing here? He's like, what you doing here? And I'm like, he said, well, that's my brother. I'm like, wait, Rodney, that's your brother? And it was just a fun experience. And then from his mother embracing us, it was like coming home and mom was just giving you a hug and welcome you into the home. But good experience with Sergeant Gillis, he worked hard to earn it, and he did earn it. So the Rodney, that's my brother, and so he's a friend. So, but Sergeant Gillis, when we got on the jobs, everybody respected. And hey, Sarge, you gave him that respect. You didn't go out on the job saying, "Hey, Rodney, what about this?" Behind closed doors, hey, we're brothers and sisters. Out on the job, hey, Sarge, how do you want this? Are you okay with this? You got that respect. But
Yep.
it was a good experience, and he expected from you the same way Sergeant DeCandia expected from you. Sergeant Gillis expected from you, and he expected from you to do the job the way the job is supposed to be done, and that's what we gave him. And he was a good boss. He was, again, because I work on him, he was the best boss of my experience. And he paid the ultimate sacrifice, but he was an awesome guy.
Yeah, and anytime I can ask about him, I like to, because everybody's got a different story, all of it positive. And there was one of many guys that understood both sides of the coin in emergency. He understood what it was like to be a cop in emergency, and he understood what it was like to be a boss, like Kenny Bowen, like John Lampkin, like Mike Curtin, who knew both sides of what it was like. And that made him a tremendous and really invaluable asset to ESU, and a testament to his bravery. His tour was finished, when that job came in that morning. He could have went home. He stayed around to shoot the breeze with the guys. He could have easily hopped in his car and went home. Okay, I'm off duty. Hopped in with the truck, went down there, and you know what? He put a team together. I think he had Ronnie and Santos with him, and I think the other guys in that team was Tommy Langone and Paulie Talty from 10 Truck. They went up, and they got as high as the 20th floor, helping numerous people along the way before that tower collapsed. I think it's around 2001, either before that day or after, and you can tell me to have it for certain that you went to Floyd Bennett, if I'm not mistaken. When did you go to the field?
Well, what had happened, like I said, Tommy Ridges had encouraged me to, go ahead and make that next step. So I did, and I was doing prerequisites. Tommy was in law school or doing his prereqs for law school. I was doing my prereqs for PA school. And once I had gotten the acceptance letter, I had to make a decision. I was not ready or wanting to give up my career, with NYPD, and especially being an ESU. I didn't want to give up that. And I wanted to achieve the goal of becoming a PA. So the Floyd Bennett Field was an option. Derek Story, he had worked, he was working down, at the field, and he kept talking to me, and, he's like, dude, you can't burn it, the candle both ends, even though it was being done to some degree. But he says, come down to the field, I'll take care of you. There's administrative work, you get that done. And, when it's quiet, you can study and stuff. So that's what I did in the beginning phases, of PA school, or at least up until 9/11 happened. Prior to that, my going down to the field was based on classes that were going into STS, or classes that were going into, for EMT refresher, or any special training per se that would come. So, that part was a good experience, because you got to really enjoy the worlds of being an instructor and then putting that instruction to use out on the street.
And again, it's important to have, because, are you a police officer that could be dealing with tactical situations? Yes. But what if an officer gets hurt? Or what if it's a medical job where, again, you're not EMS, but it could be a situation and it's happened in emergency. You get there first. If you're just standing there like, okay, put a rush in that bus. Okay, great. You're rushing the bus there. It doesn't help the person. But by knowing what to do and having the skill set, I am so glad that emergency trains guys and gals alike coming into the unit to be EMTs, because who knows how many people have been saved by the fact that you guys have that training. It's such a great thing.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. You mentioned John Bushing, Dennis Healy,
Mm,
Mike Hansen. Okay, um, you know, and there's other guys there who have a wealth of training as well. But there's jobs that come down. Before I left one truck, I was actually the operator of the truck that night. Keith Prunty got shot in the ninth precinct, and we rolled up on that job, and that was one of the jobs that I came out of the chauffeur position and went in there and started engaging him, and went with him to the hospital to make sure he survived, and thank God he did. But that's a memorable job, and he was a member of the service. He got shot, but we did what we needed to do to get him out.
mm,
And the things that we trained for, granted, yes, I have 911. As a 911 paramedic, paramedic instructor. Yes, all of that is true, but that cultivated, in that police realm, because you can talk to anybody when a cop shot goes over the ear, you know, cop down, that amps up everyone to the 10th degree and beyond.
mhm,
And everybody is wired. What you learn in ESU is to get amped up, but stay focused and breathe through that situation. So you pull up on scenes and you're not freaking out. You're pushing people aside. Let me get here. Let me start working. And let's get him in and out. And there's a lot of jobs. Keith Prunty is one of the ones that comes to mind, but there's others that are like that as well.
mhm. 2000. Joe Guerra, I had him on the show when he got shot on that
Yes.
standoff job. Same thing. Guys knew what to do, and they were
Mhm.
trained in that regard. And that's probably a huge part of the reason why he's still here today. Because if you
Yes.
didn't have guys trained in that regard, his name and plaque would be up down on the wall at Floyd Bennett Field, which nobody would want. So we're glad that he's here for that, because thank goodness that EMT training kicked in, saved the guy's life, and he's still here and he's still kicking. So there's jobs like that. Cop shot, any member of the service goes down with any injury. Stepping in is critical. The joys of teaching, I would imagine, and I'll touch on an interesting 2 years in your life momentarily, but I did want to ask about this and I asked this to Anita as well. You almost have to feel like a proud mama or papa when you bring somebody along. There they are on day one. They're probably nervous as heck, but gradually over those 6 months, now it's 9, you build them up and you watch them blossom. And then you watch them go on to do great things in their own right in the unit.
Mhm.
For you, tell me about the rewarding feeling of training somebody and watching them mold into an ECOP and prove themselves as a valuable member of the unit.
Well, for me, the joy is that you're giving back. You're giving back. Someone afforded you the opportunity, and now you're in the position of affording them the opportunity. So somebody poured into you, and you have the opportunity to pour into them. Um, so you, as an instructor, you have the opportunity that's before you to really constantly polish and shine your skill, your craft, and constantly have that. But now to take that craft, take that skill and dissect it and feed it out so that someone can else embrace the knowledge of it and then now apply it is the big thing. And it's a good feeling. So to be in the classroom one day and then be out on the street handling a job the next day was a good thing. And the guys and gals, in the unit, your fellow, E persons, they are embracing you and respecting you for what you do. They're going to rag you here and there. Oh, you're just going down there because you don't want to get your fingers dirty, and stuff, so the jokes and stuff come. But when the whistle blows and it's time to function, it's a congealed team. And there's times you're pushed up to the front There's times that you're pushed to the side, so to speak, and allow someone else to shine because they have that gift and that expertise in that aspect. So it's a good experience, and it's a proud and I'll say it this way: it's a humbling experience. Arrogance, no, it's a humbling experience.
I love how
So,
you put that. That's the highlight of the show right there. You know, I put out the highlight clips the next day. We have our highlight right there. One thing I did want to ask you about, like I mentioned, and I don't want to gloss over it, is that your 2001 to 2003 was very interesting in the sense that 9/11 occurs. I believe you had been a reservist around this time. Everybody who was a reservist, given the gravity of the situation, got deployed. So you got deployed, and you were gone for quite a bit from '01, as you were telling me off air before when we were in the process of scheduling this interview, until about '03. So take me through that time period where you go through that tragic day, you lose so many friends. Now you're being deployed. Now you know you're going to be gone from your family for a while. What kept you centered, and without getting into the confidential stuff, where did they assign you?
well, the aspect of 9/11. First off, I was down at the field. I had already started PA school. I was actually preparing for a surgery exam, and um, Craig's daughter, Crystal, called me, say, "Hey, did you hear what's going on?" And I hadn't turned on the news, and I was like, "What are you talking about?" So when I turned on the news, and we're watching, nobody can get in contact with Craig, and that was a concern. So I'm like, okay, you don't jump to the extreme thinking the worst. But anyway, we're watching, I'm watching and I'm saying, okay, I called down to the field. I said, is this an all hands evolution? And yes, it was. So anyway, I made my way down to the field. John Bushing, Dennis Healy, myself, we got geared up. And we were actually, we went over to aviation hangar, and we were actually had geared up and rigged the helicopter to actually prepare to rappel to do a repeat from the first World Trade event. So just as we were given, clearance to take off, we got grounded. That happened a second time. We got grounded. And then it was grounded until they gave clearance. So when we got flown in, John, Dennis, myself got flown in. We got dropped in the field. We made our ways, and each of us had our TAC gear. We each, hooked up with, other ESU teams to do our searches. Just making it real quick, John pulled out the Port Authority officer. Well,
one of the guys there.
I made my way to where John was, and at that point when I got there, they were carrying him down. In that carry down, I went to help out, and I had injured my right hand. Didn't think much of it, but as the days went on, my hand would swell and I would lose mobility, with my hand. So they said, no, you got to go and get checked out. Go to Coney Island Hospital, nothing. Go back working, my hand's swelling up and swelling up. They put me out. The department surgeon says, yeah, you can go back to work, but you won't have a job in the end. So either you stay out and go through, Well, anyway, when I got put back to full duty, and I was down at the field, at ground zero for about 2.5 weeks after the initial incident. But when I got put out of work, and then when they put me back full duty, shortly after that, on a Saturday morning, I get a call from Chief Petty Officer. Actually, my wife called me and said, hey, some chief called, and she's not the one that would be so militarily correct in how she phrased things. But this particular day, she was very on point with how she said that person's rank and the orders that were given to her to give to me. But anyway, I called the base. Is this Petty Officer Summers? Yes, Petty Officer Summers. This is Chief so-and-so. you're hereby being put back on active duty. So that Saturday, I got my call. That Monday, I was at Groton, Connecticut sub base. Not even a month. Yeah, not even a month later, I was deployed overseas, and going back and forth on various missions and stuff. I was medical. My function, I was a Navy corpsman assigned to a Marine squadron. And our missions took us in and out of theater, into locations and stuff, and I supported medically. That was my job. But they kept me for the first year. Just before the first year was up, they extended me for a second year. And when the second year was coming up, they were going to extend me for a third year, but they couldn't do it without me saying, okay, I now volunteer to stay another third year. They couldn't give me orders, to come back. And then that was it. So, I was gone for those 2 years. Craig, that's why I call him the big brother. He stayed in contact. He looked after the family, and not just him. Members of Truck 8 called and checked. Maddie would call. Harriet would call. They knew my wife. Well, everybody knew my wife. We knew each other's wives, but they would check on her, make sure everything was okay. Do you need anything, and stuff. And keep in mind, that was still with all of the chaos going on with 9/11. So, it had already been to the point that we understood that Rodney wasn't coming home. Whether or not it was truly accepted, as well as the rest of the, our brothers who lost their lives, we understood that. But, they still, they didn't drop the ball. They made sure my home front was taken care of as well. So, tremendous respect, to them in doing so.
Absolutely. And they did that for situations like yourself, and as you said, the members that were lost. Because here's the flip side of the coin. If you would have put Rod, and I'm just throwing names out there, Ronnie Clover, John Darrell, whoever it may have been from that group of 14 that made the ultimate sacrifice that day, they would have done the same thing for you guys if the roles were reversed. So it's just a matter of, again, that camaraderie, that brotherhood, sisterhood. You look after one another. And it's a testament to how much not just the unit, but the department overall and the members in it who take the job seriously care. And that's something that's extended well past retirement. I mean, we're still talking about it now, almost 20 years later. Those bonds, they never go away. They're for life. And speaking of retirement, you get back from deployment. 2005 comes around. Now, again, whirlwind last few years. I'll ask you, though, even with the pursuit on the side of a medical career, which blossomed for you, 20 years in 2005, combining your time between transit and NYPD, would you, given your pursuit, let's say 9/11 never happened, would you have left anyway, or were you planning to stay longer, but naturally the last few years just took a lot out of you?
Well, here's what, again, those senior moments with senior officers, they would take you aside and they would sit you down and said, hey, by your 15th year on the job, you should know what you're doing when that 20th year knocks at the door. Okay. So when the 20th year comes, the advice that was given that I embraced is you either know what you're going to do when year 21 begins, you've already started what you're going to do when year 21 begins. Okay. You have an action plan, okay, that's going to be enacted upon that. So for me, it was, physician assistant, and I had just pursued that, when I went through paramedic school, back then it was transit emergency that I was a part of. And then we had just, shortly thereafter did the merge. But still in all, it was a stair step, climactic event. I wasn't, committed to leaving the department at 20. Yes, 9/11, a lot of things changed. When I came back, Craig had retired. Um, Dwayne Barnes had retired. You know, when I, the question is, when I came back, did I go to back to A Truck? Well, the faces had changed at A Truck,
Mhm.
and it's not that I don't have any feelings for those who were there. I'm not saying at all. I love and respect them all, but I'm like, okay, my partner's not there, and other partners are not there, and the dynamics have really taken a change. So for me, going back into to A Truck would have been a difficult venture, because you can't help but think. You knew where Rodney's locker was. You knew where his locker was when he was a cop. You knew where his locker was when he made boss. And it would have been a difficult thing. So I chose to go to Nine Truck. Nine Truck treated me well up until I retired. I got no regrets there. But Eight Truck, was home. It was home. And yes, I had the choice. What I wanted to do, the same thing we talked about taking the civil servants test. I wanted to have the choice to make. And that's it. And when it came time, I made the choice.
No regrets either. You had a heck of a run, my friend. Heck of a run. I'm pretty sure if you would have gone back in time and told a Darrell Summers, 1985, that just got on and was doing those point-to-point rides, what he'd be doing across his 20 years in the police department, he would have thought you were nuts. But hey, here you are at the end of a great career. And the thing I always tell guys from PD and FD is, do you miss the job and the people? Yeah. But you know what? Hey, it's always a wonderful thing when you can get to the finish line, because there's so many great guys and gals who unfortunately did not get to. Just go down to one police plaza, look at all the names on that memorial wall of guys who never got to make the walk down to the pension section. So it's always a great thing when somebody can. And like I said, no regrets. So I took it easy on you the first hour and 50 minutes. But now I'm going to turn up the heat a little bit, because we're going to do the rapid fire. And you know the rapid fire. 5 hit and run questions from me, 5 hit and run answers from you. You can say pass if you want. I kid, of course. First question is either on patrol, EMRU, ESU, whatever it may have been. Funniest call you ever responded to?
The funniest call. There were other funny things, but keeping things clean. Mm-hmm. The funniest call. Craig and I had it actually was a cop shot, and the squad was on the scene. They were doing a search, and they came to a freeze, and they didn't give us much detail. We were Adam 8 that night, and they said, Adam 8, we need you to respond over here. So we're trying to get the detail. Even Sergeant DeCandia was like, okay, Central, what do you have them rolling into? We need to know what type of job it is. You'll be advised on the scene. Well, we get there, and the squad met us there. The precinct officers met us there, and they said, so what's up? Oh, we got a snake in the house. And okay, so why couldn't you put that up, over the air? Nah, you don't understand. This is a really big snake. I was like, okay, not a deal. So we grab the equipment and we go inside. And this was a 10-foot Burmese python that was over 100 and something pounds.
Jeez.
And we get into the place. What was crazy about it is that this guy fed this snake. He would go to the poultry market and buy live chickens. And that's what he would feed this 10-foot Burmese python. And what I didn't understand, he was so compassionate about the snake. Don't hurt the snake. Don't hurt the snake. But he put his daughter in a bunk bed on the top rack to sleep in the same room. His daughter wasn't much bigger than the chicken that he would feed it. So that logic I never understood. But anyway, we're like, well, where's the snake at? Well, the guy had put the snake in one of the chest drawers, and it was on the bottom drawer. And this was probably a 4 foot, 3.5, maybe 4 foot in width chest drawer. It was a nice size one. But, we go to pull the bottom drawer out, and you see the head of the snake pop up. And I got a decent sized hand. And when I say the head of that snake was the size of my hand, I was like, okay. So, we noosed it, and the mouth opened up and it's hissing at us or whatever. And we're fighting, and it's bending the dog pole because we had used the dog pole to pull it out.
God.
And we're fighting with it. Well, here's the funny part. Everybody, that knows me knew that my faith, in God is what carries me and keeps me. So I kept saying, oh, Jesus, oh, Jesus, oh, Jesus, while the pole is bending and the snake is pulling. So we finally get this thing out of the drawer, and Craig has got a laundry bag, and we finally get the snake. Craig is grabbing the snake while I'm holding it, the head, with the dog pole, and he's grabbing the snake and he's dumping it into the bag. But then when we put the head of the snake in the bag, I'm like, okay, it's not letting go of the dog pole. Every time I released the knot to loosen it, but it seemed like every time I pulled up on it, the snake pulled back. So Craig goes and he grabs his hand and he goes into the bag, and I grab him. I'm like, yo, I said, this pole can go to, the ASPCA with the snake. We can get another pole. We go back to court. We'll pick the snake up later. But yeah, that 10-foot Burmese python was one that we laughed about. And yes, I got ragged a lot about it, but it was one of those memorable jobs.
I have to ask before I move on to the next question of rapid fire. Why did they call it in as a cop shot, though, initially?
The perpetrator who had fired at the cop, they thought that they had the weapon there. So they had got the perp, but they were looking for the weapon. And they thought that the weapon was in the drawer with the snake. And it was not.
Okay. Well, good to know. Fact, but quite the discovery, nevertheless. Second, we go from that to what would you say is the most uplifting, positive job you ever responded to?
I'll bring up Keith Prunty. The fact that I showed up on 9 truck, not 9 truck, and he was in the 9th precinct. I was at 1 truck. The fact that I showed up there, my words to Keith was that if he didn't start breathing, I was going to put a tube down his throat, because at that point he was fighting, to breathe. And I told him, open your eyes, look at me. If you don't breathe, I'm going to breathe for you. You're not going to die on me. And he looked. I had used the BVM, the bag valve mask, to help him ventilate. We got him into Bellevue, and we did what we needed to do. And he lived to talk about it. He had invited me to. They had a celebration for him shortly after there, but I felt kind of out of way. I didn't want to go there and try to say, yeah, I did this or I did that. That's his day. I was happy to be able to see that he made it home. So for me, that was a memorable moment.
Well done. Shout out to Keith. Glad you're doing well, my friend. Third, ESU has a lot of great cooks. So especially when you're working an overnight, you need a good meal. Out of all the trucks you were in, either working there or as an assigned member or flying to them, who would you say were the best cooks you ever worked with?
Well, I'm going to take my hat off first and foremost to Paul Perricone.
I've heard.
Paulie was a good cook. And this was a truck one. Well, it's a rule in all of the trucks. When you get the notice over the air, that it's time to eat, show up. Unless, of course, you're busy working. But this particular day, Paulie made swordfish, and I don't know if he did a scampi style or what, but he brought swordfish steaks in for everybody that was working that day. And I take my hat off to Paulie. There was another officer in 7 truck that Paulie respect. He was also a cook, and I can't remember his name, but he's another one who is an excellent cook. But Paulie, definitely, much props to Paulie. He was an awesome cook.
Oh yeah, and the guys from One Truck and the Bomb Squad got to benefit from that over the years. Having him, great guy, love Paulie. He's been on the show a couple times. Fourth, favorite bar or restaurant in New York City, and you could say multiple here because you worked across different places.
The overnights, I mean, I like a good meal. I'm not a drinker, so there's different restaurants and stuff I go to, but I got to flip it back to the meals that we prepared on the overnight shifts that were outstanding meals. I mean, John Reardon one day comes in with lobsters, and we're having a lobster roast. There was steaks another night. Of course, all of the holidays. The truck lieutenant, truck sergeants would, dish out some funds, and the meals and stuff. The family aspect of it. That was just the good time. You lose track of how many holidays you miss with your family. Well, you may have missed it with the family that you said I do to. In essence, you said I do to the ESU family too. But the welcome that you got and the embracement that you got during the holidays, it made the sacrifice that you made that much more enjoyable. The one restaurant or one spot that I will say is in 10 Trucks area. It's an Italian deli where you can go and you can get your Italian grains and stuff if you're making pasta or whatever. But there was an Italian who I called grandma. Okay. Every time you walked in there, she would be either making something fresh. The last time I went there, she was making fresh mozzarella. And she would say, come, eat. You hungry? And she's feeding you, as she's making it. And sometimes it would be with a slice of tomato, mozzarella. She put some olive oil and some basil, and she's feeding you. But the food and the way they treated you there was awesome. But that was in 10 Trucks area it was Shea Stadium then, it's now Citi Field, but it's one of those spots. But that's where how I would answer that question.
Oh, it's a great answer. Like I said, I always give the guys options multiple because especially if you worked in different places across the city, you really can't pick one because there's so many darn good ones, especially in a city as big as New York. And the fifth and final one, let's say you grab somebody who's brand spanking new in ESU, and we just had a class graduate not too long ago, as a matter of fact. You can grab a brand new ESU officer, no matter what rank they're coming into the unit as. What advice would you give them as somebody that spent 17 years doing rescue work between EMRU and emergency service?
Train, perfect your craft, appreciate your team, and understand you got 10 emergency service trucks. You got Floyd Benefield, truck 11 and stuff, but still in all, appreciate your team. You asked the question about, your limits. And when we talked about fear, if you're not a high angles person, you're still in a unit that deals with high angle jobs. If you're not a water person, you're still in a unit that deals with water jobs. If you're not, a tactical guy or a Hearst tool guy, you're in a unit that is multifaceted, that deals all these things. And what I say is embrace the knowledge of your fellow, e-cop and grow from that. The one thing I'll say to every new person, and even if you've been there a while, put the arrogance aside. Put the arrogance aside. It's not about being arrogant. It's not about being cocky. It's about being proficient in the realm of emergency service work that we do, which is multifaceted. To say that you're going to go from a pin job 1 minute to putting on a level A suit another minute, to putting on your tack gear the next minute, to doing CPR another minute, okay? And all of the turmoil that goes around with that. Arrogance has no place. Cockiness has no place. Proficiency has its place. And being confident that you're going to address the job and do the job to your best. That's what I would say. I always called it Wonderland for the big kids, because I got to do some crazy fun stuff. Some crazy fun stuff.
Darrell, I think if we were in an auditorium right now, you'd be getting a standing ovation. Great job, my friend. This has been a heck of a show. Great job. Thank you so much for making the time. It's been a while coming to get you on, and I'm so glad I did. Before I say goodbye to the audience, and stick around, we're going to talk off air. Is there any shout outs to anyone or anything you want to give?
Well, all, brothers and sisters at Truck 8, Truck 9, Truck 1, and ESU, Floyd Bennett Field, we didn't mention Les Leibowitz. We didn't mention Tommy Rowe. We talked about Mike Hansen, Ronnie Perkins, John Bushing, you mentioned Anita. I send my love, to everyone, and only pray and hope the best for everyone. And, I really want to lift you up and say thank you for what you're doing, because you're putting a positive light on a career that as well as I do that doesn't always get the applause. And people say they understand what you do and what we do, but if you're not, putting on that gear, you're not going through those doors, you're not understanding it. When a person jumped on Craig's back when we did a hit in the 7-9, the person came out of nowhere, jumped on his back, and to understand that, yeah, we had the ability to shoot this person, but we didn't. Okay, you're not understanding that, and when you lose somebody, again, it's a tremendous amount of respect that goes out to everybody, and it's an awesome career. And if I had to change and do it again, I would do it again. I wouldn't make a change. So thank you for the opportunity to share.
Well, thank you for making the time. Like I said, it's an honor to profile you guys, both on the fire side and the police side. Both have welcomed me in with open arms, and it's a trust. And I always joke, I'm a teacher's pet. I'm somebody that prepares by nature. You guys can detect the BS from right away, because besides being New York City cops, you're New Yorkers first, and the BS meter for New Yorker is all the way up here. So I bring my A game because you guys have brought your A game over the years, and it's never lost on me how fortunate I am to get to know you guys on a personal level and get to profile you guys on the show. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Could I just say one last thing?
Go right ahead.
None of us, for me, I've been married for, it will be in August, 33 years. I got married, in 91. And my wife has been there. So we know that family is important. We had family at ESU, but to come home to family that embraces you, that helps you get through it. So, shout out to my wife, my love. Thank you for taking this ride with me and continuing the ride. So that's all. I got nothing else to say.
Well, I'm glad you gave that shout out. And definitely, yes, family at home, family on the job. You can't go wrong with either one. Both are tremendous strongholds. Thanks to everybody who tuned in tonight. Can't say enough about you guys in the audience, and very much appreciate you guys spending the time with us tonight. I don't want to forget about this before I go, but it's worth bringing up because yesterday was his anniversary. Take a second just to, please think of John Delara's family. April 11th was yesterday, and it was April 11th, 2002 that he was recovered from the World Trade Center. After 7 months, of course, after he had previously made the ultimate sacrifice in 9/11. So as we talked about tonight, and as you've heard me talk about before with John, another great guy, another awesome E-man, an awesome person. So just wanted to make sure I made mention of him. Yesterday was the 22nd anniversary of his recovery. Coming up next on the Mike the New Haven podcast, we don't have a guest yet for Wednesday. We might not have a show Wednesday. We'll see what happens if I could find somebody. Next Friday should be interesting. It's going to be another volume of The Beat. Profiles of police nationwide, served in the Bridgeport, Connecticut Police Department, and had actually an NYPD chief as his chief for a while, and that was Wilbur Chapman, who made the jump on over. Ron Bailey, who had quite the career in 24 years in BPD. we'll be here for another volume of The Beat. That's next Friday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. In the meantime, on behalf of Darrell Summers and producer Victor and everybody who tuned in tonight, this has been volume 45 of the E-Men inside the NYPD's Emergency Service Unit. I'm Mike Colón. We'll see you next time. And as the E-Men like to say, anytime, baby, take care and have a great weekend.
Thank you.